Well, hello and good day to everyone who are able to join or joining us online. Um, Thank you for joining us for the CFF live session today. This is going to be a really important and really, I would say, milestone session for us, considering the fact that many of Cyber Future Foundation actually started off um, as Cyber Peace Alliance, and maybe we are a little bit ahead of our time when we started talking about cyber peace, and it was more about activism and whether we're trying to as probably you'd hear today's speaker, Dr. Scott Shackelford, talk about not the absence of cyber war, but cyber peace itself is a very profound topic. And when we started in 2014, that was even before Cyber Future Foundation was incorporated as a nonprofit. We were a loosely knit set of practitioners who used to talk about how can we bring a sense of law and order in cyberspace. And this was also during the times when we had kind of a start to see a flurry of data breaches, and some of them were directly linked to nation state attacks. And at that time, even it's not so easy now, but at that time, attribution is a very difficult process, and it still is. But there were both technical issues as much as there were policy or national security issues of attributing a certain cyber attack to a certain nation state or an organized actor. So I think a very important topic that I think we all as citizens of cyberspace, you would say, or global users of cyberspace, need to be aware of. This is not only fascinating that it's this is a concept that is being that has been thought of as a more towards law and order, but also how much of technology actually goes in and is required to drive the concept of cyber peace, so that you can have an effective policy. And when you think about cyber peace, I think I also want you to consider the fact that it's a great integration of the policies, the different types of thinking, norms, principles that actually lead on to form the laws and the general the legal framework that we know today in our physical world, bringing to the cyber world, and think about the complexities that there are. So with that, I can't wait to welcome this week's speaker, Dr. Scott Shackelford. Has been a pioneer in this space, and of course, stand, I would say, on the shoulders of many tall giants out there. But this is a topic that has to get mainstream, and we made an attempt at our Cyber Future Summit last year, and almost coming to a year now, where Scott and I were in a panel. We talk about cyber peace in general mainstream parlance. How can we get it integrated into the industry discussions as well as business discussions? So Scott, great to have you back with us. I know you've done a lot of and has gone into in the past few months, even with COVID and all that, turned our lives around. But this is a topic that has taken on more traction than ever before. So please, let's introduce yourself in your own words, maybe, and then get a little bit of background of your profession.
No, happy to. Thank you so much for having me, Val. It's wonderful, wonderful to be back engaged, and I really did enjoy that gathering, as you said, almost a year ago. How is that possible?
It's true.
So, you know, a lot continues to happen in this space, and yeah, no, I'd love it. I'd love to continue this dialogue. I'm glad we're having the chance to now. So yeah, no, if you'd like, I can give you a few updates on kind of some of the work we've been up to, and then we can kind of let the conversation go from there. If that sounds good.
Absolutely does.
Fantastic, yeah. And if it's helpful at all, I'm happy to pull up a few slides, but obviously, no worries if that's too much of an issue.
Sure. Whatever can help the mission. I think the mission is, or the objective of this session is to make sure that we have we integrate, as I said, we integrate cyber peace into the mainstream cyber industry and the professional activities that we do. So please, let's start with some of the background. How did you get into this field of cyber peace?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's funny. It was definitely not the intended, end goal necessarily. Just kind of honestly stumbled across it. I was doing a kind of a visiting gig at Notre Dame. So this was like back in 2013, I
Mhm.
believe, back in the good old days. My gosh. And, I was doing a book at that point on, cyber war, like plenty of other people were, around the same time. And I was being exposed to lots of different work while I was at Notre Dame under the dome, as they say. And one of the cool things that they have there is a whole institute dedicated to peace studies. And I started reading a lot more about positive peace, and how that whole literature developed over, frankly, decades. And it got me thinking about, how can we apply some of these insights to contemporary issues in cybersecurity. So can we flip the paradigm, in other words, and not only think about managing cyber conflict, but really promoting, this ideal of a positive cyber peace? And if so, what might that look like? What are kind of the key themes, the foundations, the pillars, that we need to make that happen? And it's really, building out those pillars that's occupied, frankly, a lot of my time, especially this last year or so, with a couple of efforts, including a new edited volume on cyber peace that we have coming out next year.
That's great to hear, Scott. And you just described where you started, but I think over this real short period of time, there's been a lot of real traction and uptake in this field. And how do you describe cyber peace as a field? I mean, is it more towards policy? Is it more towards the tech implementation or national law security? How do you position cyber peace as a
Yeah,
domain?
I mean, that's part of, like, both the opportunity and frankly the challenge of this concept, right? Because kind of like sustainability, it can mean lots of different things to lots of different stakeholders. And that's a good thing on the one hand, because it can engage people in a way that I feel like discussions about cyber norms or cyber security can be kind of off-putting, right? Whereas peace, I think that has a different reaction, kind of a deeper hold on, on psyches and imaginations. But at the same time, if it's too, amorphous, that doesn't really, get us very far in terms of kind of more concrete next steps, right? So, from my vantage point, I like it, because it's a way to bridge, I think, some of the most important debates, at least in cyber and internet governance at this point. So, it gets us thinking in kind of some new ways about, not only promoting human rights and internet access, engaging this whole debate around multi-stakeholder governance in an era where, cyber sovereignty and digital fragmentation, given the whole 5G debate, is very much in vogue. So it gets us kind of thinking about broadening that stakeholder community in ways that I think are frankly under threat, right now, and why that's important to do. And also, it's I think really important because it gets us thinking about this whole concept of, resilience, and stability. And I think in some really important new ways. We had this cyber peace workshop at NYU, this last fall, and there were several, global commissioners on the Global Commission for Cyber Stability, like Chris Painter and Frederick Duzo and others who were involved with that discussion. And that was one of their main points, is that some of these main pillars that we've identified, around this edifice of cyber peace, which yes, absolutely includes the respecting human rights, spreading internet access, cybersecurity best practices, strengthening multi-stakeholder mechanisms. But this idea of stability and resilience is really important, right? And frankly, I would even add in, sustainability, to that, since all of the sustainable development goals have a cybersecurity component to them, right? So I think it's a policy question. Cyberspace. So it's an interesting exercise for sure, kind of a thought experiment to think about where this is headed 10, 20, 30 years down the road. But as you say, we've made a lot of progress in bringing this to the fore, even in the last couple of years. So I'm hopeful.
Well, I mean that's very optimistic. I think taking a concept or a domain completely from a concept to mainstream, I think takes a lot of uh, vision as well as a lot of foresight, I would say, and also a lot of persistence, right, to make it happen. And I'm glad you were able to stick to it. And however serendipitous was to get into cyber peace, I believe it has been the concept of peace keeping, as an economy or a nation, and the concept of the growing cyber kind of melded together to build this great domain, right?
Mhm.
So in the last few let's kind of walk that journey a little bit, if
Yep.
you will, right? Say 4 or 5 years back, when we had this even the mention of this nation state cyber attacks, right? The cyber war concept, and bringing its counterpoint to more circumspective around cyber peace. Where do you draw the line between cyber war and cyber peace? And I think you well stated in your paper and back in the Notre Dame output, right, that cyber peace is not the absence of cyber war. So can you emphasize on that point?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it kind of depends on the vantage point you take. And a lot of people, when they first hear cyber peace, think automatically about, all right, that's going to be the absence of cyber attacks, right? And that's even how the World Federation of Scientists and the Vatican and some of those early efforts back in 2011 came at this topic, that it's going to be this wholesale state of tranquility online and the absence of disorder or violence even. And of course, that'd be wonderful, and both offline and online, frankly. But we don't unfortunately live in that world now, and it sure looks like, at least for the foreseeable future, those types of goals are frankly kind of unattainable. So instead of thinking about it from this negative cyber peace vantage point, the end of cyber attacks, as you say, I think this more positive vision can be very useful, both for animating all of us to take action, frankly, at lots of different levels, from personal to organizational to national to international, with various norms efforts that we can talk about, like the Paris Call for Trust and Security in Cyberspace, through the GGE and otherwise. But also it gets us, I think, kind of thinking in new ways about, as you say, kind of where to draw some of those bright lines, right? Because as many as and as many I'm sure who are listening are aware, the vast majority of cyber attacks are happening below what we call the armed attack threshold, right? So they're not acts of war per se. They're not equivalent to an attack by kinetic forces. So we don't see basically diehard fours, popping up all the time. But with that 99.9% of cyber attacks happening below that threshold, that's still causing a tremendous amount of damage. There's lots of
5,000 paper
personal
cuts.
identifiable information, intellectual property, critical infrastructure that's being manipulated, that remains vulnerable. So it's still problematic, and governments, including the US, but around the world, are grappling with what's the appropriate role for the public and private sectors in managing that threat, right? So I think it's in that gray area that's below the threshold where, for example, the Talon Manual 2.0 focus. That's where I think this whole realm of cyber peace can really help out a lot in thinking through what are all the tools that we have at our disposal right now, through international law, of course, but also otherwise, and where are those gaps, right? And how can we all help to fill those in the most, frankly, equitable way possible.
Yeah. No, I think that kind of emphasizes the breadth of the different actors involved, right? Can you little bit throw a light on like beyond the academic and the policy spheres, who do you see as stakeholders in this cyber peace discussion as it grows?
Yeah, well, frankly, whether we're aware of it or not, we all are, because we all have a stake kind of in the outcome of these debates that are happening right now in boardrooms and in policy circles and international summits, now virtually, of course, but that are happening now all around the world. So, the good news though is that I think that there is now a broadening ecosystem of players that are really dedicated, to this concept, to unpacking it, to furthering the mission. I think we have a role to play on, more of the academic side, to do some of the legwork there and trying to, think through the convergence of these different definitions and norms efforts to try to track kind of where we're at. And we can also do some of the normative, heavy lifting, drawing from these positive peace disciplines to figure out, where we could be headed, building on, as you said, the work of giants in that process, right? But ultimately, I think not only the Cyber Future Foundation, but now these days, the Cyber Peace, both foundation in India and the Cyber Peace Institute in Geneva, and a number of other groups, even groups like, frankly, the Red Cross and otherwise, are increasingly interested and
Oh,
dedicated,
I didn't
really,
know about Red
to
Cross
this
getting
concept.
involved. That's great to know, because
Mhm.
they are, they are a major body in maintaining peace, and a very noble mission, right? So that's great to know.
For sure. For sure.
Um,
Yeah. And it is. It is. So, I mean, in some ways, I think you could mark out, especially the period from, 2016 to 2020, there were some big, shall we say, hiccups in cyber norms building
right.
efforts around the world. But, at the same time, we've really seen the growth of this ecosystem, which in part, frankly, I think is a reaction to the kind of stagnation of a lot of the multilateral cyber norm building efforts. But in response, now we have a really robust civil society led effort, as well as, frankly, from some big elements of the private sector, like MasterCard and Microsoft and otherwise, behind the Cyber Peace Institute, to really try to change this, change the course of this conversation, and in so doing have an impact, right, on some of those policy discussions that are underway. And the Paris call and the Christchurch calls are just a couple of examples of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the more mainstream this becomes, the more engaged people are. It's better for everyone to take a full stake in the growth and adoption of cyber, right? Uh, well, when it comes to the actual discipline itself, what do you think are some of the key elements that define cyber peace? And I'll put it in two ways, right? And one
Mhm.
thing is, I'm trying to get more people, hopefully more young people, to get into this stream and field as well, because I think it's a pretty broad field and durable in nature. So how would you describe what are the main traits you'll be looking for whether it's cyber peace study, or and the skills required to be successful in this space?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I would preface my answer by saying there's definitely not consensus on what I'm about
I
to
can
say, which
understand.
I think is healthy, right? It's
Yeah.
healthy at this stage because that does provide a space, as you just said, for lots of voices, including students or younger professionals that are keen on this topic and want to make a contribution. And frankly, I think that's what needs to happen to really make this space take off that much faster, and this concept. And part of what we're doing in this edited volume on cyber peace, as well as a companion article I have coming out called "Inside the Drive" for cyber peace, is to do exactly some of that heavy lifting. So we have, for example, chapters coming out not only looking at the fundamentals in terms of the definitional piece, which I'll come back to in just a second, but also case studies, right? Looking to see, for example, what lessons can we learn from UN peacekeeping efforts offline, as well as the Digital Blue Helmets Initiative, and other related efforts, of course. And then, looking forward, how does all of this kind of fit in with some of the ongoing, UNGGE or the open-ended working group discussions? So having said that, I think there are a couple of core, at least pillars or principles that often come up in this context. For example, I mentioned before the four pillars that we're using for this cyber peace edited volume, right? And those are basically looking more, again, in this positive direction of building out a system of internet governance that respects, number one, respects human rights. Number two, spreads internet access along with cybersecurity best practices. Number three, strengthens these multi-stakeholder governance mechanisms that have been so frayed, right? And number four, promotes a system that's resilient, stable, right, and sustainable ultimately in the long term. How that gets translated, though, I think is pretty interesting. So, for example, in the Paris call, we saw these 8 principles that, in this case, those dozens now of countries and hundreds of companies and universities agreed to. And those were more applied in different contexts, right? Like the need to cooperate to protect electoral processes or combat intellectual property theft or promote cyber hygiene, right? Or to have a norm against private sector hackback. And those are all incredibly important, and they can be baked in, I think, to frankly various of those overlapping pillars that I talked about before. Some of the more interesting work that I'll just end my kind of longer answer, so sorry about that now, is on kind of unpacking different internet freedoms kind of baked into this concept as well. And as part of that, we're looking back at FDR's famous Four Freedoms speech, right? where he kind of envisioned a world that would recognize freedom of speech and expression and religious freedom and freedom from want and freedom from fear. And I think particularly in this era of disinformation, and figuring out the most appropriate ways to control, the spread of it on different social media platforms. That freedom from fear is really resonates, I think, and it's kind of interesting. So some of the work that we're doing on the edited volume that's coming out from Cambridge Press next year, as well as this separate article that I mentioned inside the Global Drive for Cyber Peace, is unpacking those four freedoms and applying them through this lens of cyber peace. Because I think that can resonate potentially again with kind of a different group that's more used to thinking about the promotion of human rights offline, but equally important online these days.
Well, I think that's fascinating because each of the pillars that you mentioned itself themselves uh, are big towers themselves, right? If you look at the overall challenges around in the freedom of speech and expression could be taken in many different ways, right? So if while you don't want to regulate that, you do want to make sure that there is regulation around hate speech, there is regulation around kind of terrorism and inciting violence and all those things. They do matter, and they're actually being more emphasized and right now because of what's going on with social media platforms and all. You can't even, how do you track back who are inciting violence or spreading fake news? They are very serious policy considerations. So the next thing that I would kind of want to explore with you is that when you think about the policy typically follows technology right now, because technology is going so fast, and the development of policies is has its own pace, right? The whole sausage making is a multi-year process, and then we have dealt with that with standard development bodies and all that, right? Things are not like that anymore. I mean, things are moving along at a very, very high, faster clip right now. When you look at social media and the influence that many of the policy definitions would have, what are your thoughts around that social media being an instrument of carrying the message of cyber peace versus there being a platform where people can just use the freedom of expressions to just share anything, right? And that becomes a fake news galore.
That's it.
So platforms, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, you're right, because even in the four freedoms idea that I just kind of cited there, you're right to point to, well, freedom from fear and freedom of speech can absolutely be at loggerheads on these platforms, right?
Yeah.
And we're basically leaving it up, to those platforms right now, at least, and from the US approach, to figure out that balance for themselves because of, Section 230, not to get too much in the weeds of the Communications Decency Act. And there's a whole debate right now about, how to reform that, how to revise it, to potentially hold, these platforms more accountable for the type of content, including disinformation and hate speech, that gets posted up there. But interestingly, we have another piece coming out. This one is in the Washington and Lee Law Review, if I remember right, and it's called "Defending Digital Democracy." And it really takes a deep dive on this question of digital repression and how countries around the world, frankly, are trying to combat it, right? And you see a lot of different approaches, with the EU really kind of doubling down on this new code for disinformation that they kind of strong armed the big social media companies to sign up to a couple years ago. Of course, it's not perfect, and there's been plenty written about the ways that it's kind of fallen short in the midterm elections and otherwise a couple of years ago. But still, it's a useful step forward. Other countries are just criminalizing, frankly, a lot of this behavior. Indonesia now, for example, has basically a whole agency dedicated to it because they think it's so destabilizing. And of course, as a result, it can be a tool to silence dissidents, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's a lot of this is in the eye of the beholder, right? So that in itself is problematic. But I think having that, I think in some ways the Paris call was a bit forward looking, when it listed the protection of electoral processes and the spread of disinformation as part of this call for trust and security in cyberspace, because it is an absolutely vital part of the conversation. We can't only be focused on protecting hospitals, right, or cyber hygiene. These days disinformation is an increasingly central component, frankly, of cybersecurity, and I'd argue cyber peace as well. So, we're not going to, feel safe or ultimately be able to build trust between, such disparate communities if we don't have a better handle, frankly, on this problem. So, I don't, again, presume to have all the answers there. I think we're absolutely, though, going to see some changes in the US context in Section 230, one way or the other,
Mhm.
whether that's a complete, reversal or a reform. And like I said, there's a real time experiment going on around the world with other models, right? And I think there's some really interesting research to be done to figure out which are working the most effectively on the one hand, controlling that spread while still, ideally protecting as much, free speech rights of users as possible.
Yeah, no, I think we are in a very interesting time. Is just an understatement right now, with so much being at stake, right? Both on with the U.S. elections, which will be kind of a it's a lightning rod right now, attracting all sorts of different and I would say both speculation as well as hopefully a lot of good work, right? That is being done to defend the democracy. It's and everything is being done in cyber right now, and then you have to have an implicit trust on the system to trust the outcome, right? Because both are so tightly connected, and you doubt one and you are in the danger of doubting the other, which would have very serious repercussions, not only in the country but internationally. And I believe cyber peace is an is a fundamentally underlying concept, which builds that trust, right? Uh, so let me ask you about, if you were to think about, I mean, now this is a evolving topic, with a very vast majority of that is being done by, I would say, intellectuals and leaders, right? If you were to think about practitioners taking guidance from cyber peace, where would you point them? I mean, is it we have this concept of tech for good and cyber for good now is kind of evolving, right? But where do you say the practitioner's understanding should lie with respect to cyber peace?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned some of those connectors right there, Val, because we had Bruce Schneier out earlier this year to give our OSHA Memorial Lecture on cybersecurity, and he really emphasized the public interest technology work that he's been doing, and frankly, he did it, which I thought was really cool, kind of in the context of cyber peace. So we had a kind of a neat discussion. Actually, we're going to be dropping that podcast finally. It took us a while to get it done in a couple of weeks, so I'll happily send it to you when it's ready to be
That'd be great.
distributed. But yeah, I mean, I think absolutely there's 100% overlap, with some of the content from kind of the public interest technology. So, on the one hand, it can include, frankly, volunteering your time. We've been trying to scale up this concept of a cyber peace corps, for a while now. We have a new cybersecurity clinic at IU with some generous support from the Hewlett Foundation and otherwise that we got off the ground. And that's been great, in helping out kind of under-resourced stakeholders around the Midwest, mostly so far, though we did do some work for the Global Cyber Alliance in this last round as well. But frankly, that's only going to get us so far if we don't have a whole, system of partners, right? And other, not only clinical opportunities for students, but other programs, kind of the equivalent, of an AmeriCorps type experience where, professionals that have this training in cybersecurity, which is so much in demand, volunteer, frankly, a portion of their time and help out not only nonprofits and critical infrastructure providers here in the States, but, these days virtually around the world.
Yeah.
And the Cyber Peace Foundation in India, they've been doing some useful work in trying to scale up that concept, particularly around South Asia and in Africa. But I'd love to see us do, frankly, a lot more of that in North America. And I think that's a great way that we could, frankly, partner and build out that network. There's only a handful, of universities doing this right now. Berkeley, UT Austin are only a couple of the others in that space. But I'd love to see, a growing number of community colleges, offering
Yeah.
these types of programs. And I think if we were able to help with that matchmaking exercise of, identifying those nonprofits and otherwise that need, different things done with, a cadre of professionals who are willing to help out, that'd be really, really wonderful. So anyway, we can follow up more and talk about that, but
No,
that's
I
where I'd
think
like to see this headed.
that's a great view to put together in terms of how can we enable this, because this could be a professional career itself, right? I mean, policy has always been, I mean, overall, but I think cyber policy specifically, if you start your early, I think this is so much of an intricate combination of national security, international affairs, and overall government regulations, where too much regulation can always hurt, but if you completely lax, and then we are in this social media mess right now, right? So there's a pretty balance between the two, and I think you need the sooner we can get practitioners engaged who are aware and can be fact based and experience based, I think will be wonderful, because theoretical knowledge can go so far. One thing that I really appreciate and really admire in what you have done, and then folks that you are that you have surrounded yourself with and then worked with, including Bruce himself, is that these are the leading lights of security industry, right? I mean, they understand the actual nuances and practical problems that need to be solved towards gaining getting the policy right. Right now, I think the initial approach, primarily with lawmaking and everything, is people have a concept and they define the concept, and then they put the concept forward, and that becomes the policy. But here in this particular space, you need to be very, very practical what can and cannot be done. So I think cannot overemphasize that fact. I think will be point well taken for the industry themselves. Well, in the few minutes we got, there's so many topics I wanted to touch on, but especially the four principles that you're based in itself, individually could be sessions themselves, and I believe that's what your session whole series is based on, right? But think about a unique challenge that you want to throw to these practitioners, so to get them engaged, right? I think one of the things that people really they get engaged when they feel that, okay, this is a challenge I'm here to solve for any, I know this is kind of a the dicey question to get to because the field is so broad. So what do you think the top one or two or even three challenges that you throw to the practitioners to solve for you?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I think taking an active role in not only your local communities, so trying to seek out opportunities to serve, and I think there's ways to network and make kind of lower those transaction costs, frankly, and make that easier. But getting involved locally, I think, is helpful. I was amazed as soon as we put out the call, for the new clinic, how many organizations, community foundations, even our local children's science museum, everybody had extremely pressing needs that just weren't being served, right? So even just in casual conversations, trying to raise that, and then us, of course, doing more as a community to raise that, I think is really helpful. And then, frankly, staying mindful and staying engaged in some of these debates that are happening. Maybe it's through forums like the Internet Society, right, or IETF even, or otherwise. But getting involved in some of these groups that are tackling kind of the high level issues of internet governance are really important, because if we don't stay involved in that kind of multi-stakeholder community, then frankly, we're going to lose it. So I think if you're passionate about this stuff, getting active in those various groups is really important. I did a piece with Scott Bradner not too long ago, who's one of kind of like the forefathers of internet governance, and that was one of his main takeaways as well. Is this first generation stood up this incredible thing, right? This scaled up global network commons in a lot of ways that is now being in the process to varying degrees of being dismantled, right? So I think if people really appreciate kind of where we're at and have some knowledge about how we can make things better, it's not only our privilege but our duty to really step up and make sure that that your voices are heard. So we're happy, of course, to help with that. There's lots of ways to get involved in the academic side. We have a whole cyber peace working group at the Ostrom Workshop that you can join. Just go to ostromworkshop.indiana. You can sign up. Like I said, we're having a follow-up cyber peace colloquium next month with the more than dozen scholars and practitioners writing for the edited volume. You're more than welcome to come participate in those sessions as well. So get involved. That's the bottom line.
Many opportunities to actually contribute, significantly and meaningfully into this, I would say, broad domain that's shaping up. I mean, this is not ground floor anymore. Like, you've already built the foundation, the ground floor is ready and ready to move in, right? So all you have to do is to grow it upwards and sideways. So I think this has been a great experience. This topic is very close to heart. Personally, I would say myself, as well as Cyber Future Foundation. So anything that we can do to contribute to grow this space will be definitely worthwhile. Well, as we get to the few final moments, this session again, thank you for spending so much time with us. I would like to any final words you want to share with the audience or those that will be tuning in to listen to this session?
Yeah, no, just, I mean, especially these days, there's a lot of doom and gloom, right? And a lot of reasons to be pessimistic on a lot of fronts, right? But I think the
That's
good
right.
news is that a lot of the stuff we're talking about in this context are solvable problems, and there's a real opportunity to make a pretty positive and long-lasting, contribution to a much, more secure and sustainable cyberspace, for our kids and for our grandkids. So I think, having that opportunity and seizing it can be, frankly, a bit of a tonic right now. So I'd encourage you guys to get involved. Please reach out. There's lots of ways that you can contribute.
Fantastic. Well, Scott, thank you for spending your afternoon with us. This has been really great, bringing together and to the public forum. I would say the discussions that we have had, one-on-ones in closed doors and then smaller settings. And also this is kind of teeing up this topic for our summit coming up in October. So 28th to 29th, as we just got logged into that date, we'll make an announcement very soon when this talk is going to be on the floor. But I believe, it will be a change of scene, of course, moving from a interactive in-person session that we so much enjoyed having you in, and it actually created a lot of interest within the CFF community, and so we have been being able to I would say track and see and now contribute to the growing domain of cyber peace. Many of our friends, as you probably rightly pointed out, Cyber Peace Institute and the folks from Cyber Peace Foundation, and many others who do this as a dedicated program within their larger umbrella programs are starting to get involved. I can't wait to see when somebody would come and ask me. It has not happened. I have to honestly admit that somebody would come and ask me, well, how can I have a candidate in cyber peace? And that's when I'll say, okay, go talk to Dr. Shackelford. Okay, and maybe he will take you as a disciple of cyber peace, or lead you to the right colleagues who can address your curiosity in this space. But I think this is a very, very important topic, strategic importance. Many have actually contributed to this up to today, and I think there is more to be done as we move forward. In fact, many of the professionals who I have seen engaged in the policy making, especially on the national security side, as well as on the in terms of diplomatic side, they have had a very good industry career, if you will. I mean, I've seen tech ambassadors take up really good policy making jobs. So there is a real opportunity here for those who are tuning in for career advice. And since this is I would say master mentor or society of mentors session, I would say whoever is joining in or listening into this later point, I think there is a significant body of knowledge already built up. There is an active contribution being made by Dr. Shackelford and his team of experts, both within the University Ostrom workshop and larger global forums. So please feel free to drop in a note to either of us if you want to get involved. I know I'm personally, we're speaking at one of your programs this week itself. So can't wait for that to happen. And while we prepare for that, take some time to look at the backgrounds and some of the materials. And Scott, I'd be happy to forward to our community any of this. I know we didn't get into a PowerPoint mode, but I'm sure we'll delve into that in a deeper dive sometime in a focused workshop. So happy to share this content, whatever content you have or want to share, both in terms of literature as well as knowledge awareness presentation to the next newsletter going out to the CFF community. Okay, excellent. Great.
One thing I should have mentioned is, if you really want a deep dive, this just came out as well, and we could put in the newsletter. So this is my most recent book on the concept
the book,
of
actually, you have to bring it probably towards the camera.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yes. No, it likes it's taking over the virtual background.
Oh no! Oh no! I love that. I love that. Sorry about that. Here we go.
Technology, right? So
I'll give it to you when we're the link to you. But there you go. It is called Governing New Frontiers in the Information Age Towards Cyber Peace. It's a bit of a tome, but it's going to tell you everything you want to know
All right, that sounds great.
about the state of the field.
We'll probably have someone just read through it and prepare excerpts for the executives. I think that's the way to
Oh, that'd
go.
be great.
Get people engaged. All right,
Absolutely.
fantastic stuff. Great speaking with you, and thanks for sharing the journey of cyber peacemaking and building this domain. And I'm sure we'll be connected and looking forward to our next opportunity to speak together. Okay. Thank you,
Absolutely.
everyone. Take care and have a good rest of the day. Cheers. Bye-bye.